Teal dear, Shaun and Jen are either stupid, ignorant, blind, or outright liars. I personally am leaning much more towards calling them liars. But let's take a look at why, shall we?
Hello everyone, this is a video about TL DR, or teal deer. You see, because it's a teal deer. Yeah.
God damn it, I really do feel so internet famous when people say my name.
And in particular, this video is a response to his video, Anita Sarkeesian Doesn't Understand How to Be a Feminist, concerning Anita Sarkeesian's speech at the How to Be a Feminist panel at All About Women 2015. But before we get to that, well, you know the drill by now.
Well, I don't know your particular drill, but I do know mine. Very well, in fact. So before we go any further, what I'd like to do is to point out two things here. First of all, note the video that he has chosen to address. This is a video that is over a year old. Now, I'm not going to do anything with that piece of information quite yet, but just keep that in your mind because we're going to come back to it a bit later. And just a note from this point going onwards here, you might have noticed that this guy speaks really, really slowly and in a really monotonous voice. And on this channel, there's only enough space for one of us to do that, and I got here first, damn it. So I'm going to be speeding up the rest of his clips so that I can get this done in less than an hour. Cause god damn it, I don't know how this guy did it, but he's managed to make my voice look high energy.
So the videos I'm asked to respond to broadly fall into two categories. There's the, for want of a better word, intellectual videos. You know, they cite studies and news stories and sources and at least attempt some sort of academic defense of their positions. And on the other hand, we've got the peanut gallery, the hecklers. And what they do is watch someone, usually a feminist, and usually Anita Sarkeesian, to be honest, say a sentence, and then they cut away to a cartoon animal doing the DreamWorks face, and they say a naughty word. And I've honestly struggled to come up with a response to this sort of video.
Okay, so this is where the year-old thing comes into play. And this makes me question why exactly he has cherry-picked this one video out of my entire repertoire to respond to. And you'll also notice that he doesn't actually address the entirety of the video. He literally cherry-picks about 10 minutes out of a 20-minute long video. And this is done so that he can maintain the lie that I fall into the peanut gallery of hecklers who stop a video every 30 seconds to say a naughty word. And that's kind of where what I do ends, with no sort of link or reference to any sort of academic study or source or news media or anything like that. I'd like to point out here that referencing a news story doesn't actually prove that you're right, but that's another story for another time. Leading back onto why he's had to so desperately cherry-pick about 10 minutes out of this video as opposed to addressing the whole thing, well, that's probably because if you actually watched the entire video and then checked the box below that video, what are all of these down here? Well, those look like links. I wonder where they go. The WISE campaign, a campaign to promote women in science, technology, and engineering, the National Bureau of Economic Research, and the National Women's Law Center. Now, why on earth would I be referencing sources like this in a video if all I do is stop other people mid-sentence every 30 seconds and say naughty words? It's almost like that's not what I do. So it would appear that this person's assertion is actually contradicted by their own piece of supposed evidence. But I'm going to go a little bit further, because I can. So let's just briefly look at some of the content which I have done on my channel, and we're going to go in reverse chronological order, because I think it's really going to highlight how desperately this person is lying to people in order to perpetuate this falsehood. So most recently, we've had the video Teal Deer, A Biological Reason, Fussy Eaters, a video in which I look at child food neophobia and how it is partially genetically heritable, and that entire video is basically reading a paper from the Journal of Pediatric Obesity, and that video links to two of my other videos, Teal Deer, Genetic Determinism, The Red Herring Returns, a video in which I do nothing but read chapters out of a textbook and look at academic studies, because I'm talking about the false charge of genetic determinism that people like to level at fields such as biopsychology, and it also links to Genetic Determinism, the Evolutionary Red Herring, another video in which I do nothing but read the first half of a chapter from a book about evolutionary psychology, which also challenges the false charge of genetic determinism. So my most recent video links to 2 other videos, none of which are me stopping a video every 30 seconds to say naughty words. In fact, they are entirely me looking at academic sources. Before that, we had the video titled Feminists Don't Understand Snowplowing, which was a bit more of a light-hearted video looking at the recent problems that Stockholm has had with its snowplowing problems, owing to a change in procedure whereby they would be attempting to prioritize marginalized groups as opposed to targeting main roads, and that this change in strategy was partly informed by the basic concept of social justice and feminist ideology. And in that video, you will notice I look at a lot of news sources and even actually look at the maps of the areas so that we can start to understand why this change in approach failed. Nothing particularly academic here, but according to this guy, referencing news stories counts, so there you go. Before that, we had the video titled Birth Control Jab for Men, a video in which I do nothing but read an academic study from the Journal of Clinical Endocrinology and Metabolism so that people can actually understand what that clinical trial was about, and then we look at some of the news stories surrounding it and how they were particularly ill-informed, making claims about the paper which were not supported, or in some cases, fabricating things whole cloth. Next major piece of content before that was titled What Polished Man Isn't Telling You, a video where I look at the false claims made by a charity regarding criminal statistics of child abuse, and I follow their own statistics back from the National Sexual Violence Resource Center to the Bureau of Justice Statistics, to the FBI and the National Incident-Based Reporting System, and we discover that that charity's claim on those figures is actually thoroughly misleading. And then we finish up looking at some statistics from the Administration on Children, Youth and Families. And as the final example, before that we had the video titled The End of Agi, Rise of the Pink Ceiling, the final video in a series called the Agi Saga. In this particular one, I look at a lot of news stories surrounding the female drug Agi. And even in that video, I talk about 2 studies which look at the prevalence of drug use in rape cases, where people claim to have had their drinks spiked. And if we go back and look through the Agi saga in its entirety, because hey, why not, it's linked to this video, that would be the video series where I look at the clinical trials of the drug Agi and discover that it is completely worthless, that it does not serve to enhance women's libido as it claims, that it interacts very poorly with alcohol and causes a lot of women to lose consciousness, that it overrides the effect of the contraceptive pill, and then, in the follow-up videos to it, I look at how feminist organizations and women's rights organizations pressured the FDA with accusations of sexism to get this dangerous drug pushed onto the market, under accusations of misogyny if they didn't. And I would point out to you that I broke this story on YouTube 6 months before the mainstream media even caught wind of it. But remember guys, all I do is heckle people by stopping their videos every 30 seconds to say naughty words. So now that Shaun has been demonstrated to be resoundingly wrong on this accusation, I guess we can actually go ahead. But not quite yet. You see, I'm still curious as to how and why this one particular video, because it's not featured on the front page of my channel. Not directly anyway. In order to find it, you have to look at the Popular Uploads tab and scroll all the way to the end to find the last visible video, requiring you to bypass 11 other videos, which requires him to have ignored Teal'Dear Lacey Green Doesn't Understand Halloween, a video loaded with sex, crime, and rape statistics, Teal'Dear Anissian Doesn't Understand Women Against Feminism, a video loaded with news stories and links to the National Archives, in which I read historical laws and look at historical voting rights taken from actual historical sources, Teal Deer, MTV Doesn't Understand History, a video that is so loaded with sources, from news stories to educational sources to historical sources, patent office papers and medical journals, so many links to sources that I ran out of space in the description box of the video and had to continue them in the comments section. He had to ignore all of that in order to find this one thing. All of this taken together just makes this look like very cherry-picked and deliberate dishonesty.
Absent an argument, I guess one way to respond to these heckling videos is to turn the particular shtick of whichever heckler it is back on themselves. But I don't want to do that with Bearing, because it'd just be me calling him a dickhead for 20 minutes, and I don't think anyone really wants to watch that, and I don't want to make that either. It'd be entirely too negative. But with Teal Deer, I think I've found my man. You see, Teal Deer has a particular quirk that I have no problem at all with turning back on him. You see, he's a pedant.
As a woman on YouTube, I would describe my experience as careful, empowering, brave.
Right, I'm gonna go full grammar Nazi autist on this because I can. Careful and brave are not experiences. Those are methods of acting. They are a way of being. It's not something that you experience. The actual sentence that you'd want to use would be, my experience on YouTube has involved me needing to be careful. My experience on YouTube required me to be brave.
It's realizing that being a feminist is a lifelong learning endeavor, and that we will make some mistakes on the way, and we should be compassionate to ourselves when that happens.
And speaking of mistakes that you make, Anita, I really think that you should look up the definition of the word compassion, because it doesn't mean what you think it means.
That's right, a pedant. An honest-to-God, old-school, dictionary-quoting pedant. And that's going to be our angle right there. We are going to be smug and pedantic, right back at Teal Deer.
Well, good luck, bro, but unfortunately, I've got you beat, as if I didn't already. You see, that video that you referenced there came from Teal Deer Women on YouTube Don't Understand YouTube. And remembering your claim that all I do is heckle, stop videos every 30 seconds to say naughty words, I'm guessing that you are completely fucking blind. Looking down at that description box under there, now while I do have a lot of YouTube references here, and non-news source things, because, well, that was the nature of this video, take a little look further down there. What's that? Oh look, YouTube stats and the 2200 figure. Those are links to aggregated data lists analyzing YouTube traffic. What channels there are, who's watching them, and in what metrics. That's not the kind of thing that someone would feature in a video if all they do is heckle. And now just a little word about your blatant misrepresentation of what I was saying in that video. Did you notice the part where I start the sentence with, I'm going to go full grammar Nazi autist on this? Does that not maybe suggest to you that the point that I am making is not completely serious? Because that's what it would suggest to normal people. But what I do notice is that you cut that sentence off, something which you try and get on my case about doing later on, so maybe you should have played that out in its entirety, because then you'd notice that that point ended with this.
The empowered example is fine because you can feel empowered by taking a certain course of action. That's completely reasonable. Like I said, I'm maybe just overanalyzing a turn of phrase here, but they just seem a little bit weird. Moving on.
Yeah, quote mining in order to misrepresent someone is a dangerous business, because you've intentionally cut off the part where I say, hey look, I'm overanalyzing this, because I just found it a little bit odd that they would choose to phrase it in that way. I'm not trying to pull some sort of, oh, your grammar is bad, blown the fuck out, get wrecked scrub, sort of thing. No, I'm just pointing out that the phrasing was a little bit unusual. I'm even admitting and openly stating, look, this isn't like some sort of valid point against them, it's just something which I found odd.
Teal Deer. And I admit, I'm cheating a bit here by responding to a video about Anita Sarkeesian, who, for whatever reason, always brings out the worst in these guys.
Nah man, you're cheating for a whole load of other reasons that you're not even aware of. But I'd like to think that I've set the record straight on those.
She's the red rag to the dumb YouTube bull. Or deer, in this case.
Oh, you.
So let's get to it.
So throughout high school and college, I was involved with clubs organizing against wars in the Middle East, raising awareness about climate change, and demanding gay and lesbian rights.
Ah yes, because women have truly always been the primary victims of war. They are also quite obviously the group most affected by climate change, and it's a well-documented fact that homosexual men need feminism. The only thing that you've mentioned there that even comes close to being an issue for feminism is lesbian rights, and that is purely because some lesbians may choose to identify themselves as being feminists. But you do realize that you can be a lesbian and not a feminist, right? So you really shouldn't presume to speak for all lesbian women everywhere, you heterosexual oppressive shitlord. After all, nothing quite says I'm fighting for equality like speaking over all of those marginalized voices.
So we're off to a good start. Anita says she was involved with a bunch of social justice causes, and then Teal'c cuts in to explain how he thinks those causes aren't feminist causes. And there's a problem here. Teal'c cut Anita off in the middle of a sentence. You see, the start of Anita's speech reads like this. But that's not the end of the sentence right there. She goes on to say, so I was heavily involved with social justice causes, but I still didn't call myself a feminist. Now, nowhere here is the implication that Anita does actually think that, say, climate change, for instance, is a feminist cause. She's merely listing some social justice causes she was involved with, the implication being that one might expect someone who is heavily involved with a bunch of social justice causes to be a feminist. However, Anita's point is that despite being involved with these various causes, she wasn't a feminist.
Now you see, this is simply a difference in reading, and you're going to find this a lot with this guy's supposed rebuttals. He basically says, well, my interpretation is different from your interpretation, and that means I'm right and you're wrong. So let's just run through a little example here about why I think he's misunderstood the basic point of the sentence, because structure is important. If someone were to say something along the lines of, I'm really good at playing the piano, but I don't see myself as a pianist. Does that imply that playing the piano has nothing to do with being a pianist, or does it imply the opposite? That's somewhat how I would think of this. Now, he states that her implication was that despite being involved with these causes, she wasn't a feminist or didn't consider herself one. Anita's choice of words, I didn't call myself one, to me implies that with retrospect, she was one, but simply didn't know it yet, which is that if she had known now what she knew at the time, she would have called herself one. If you couple that with a very popular feminist notion that any advocacy for equality necessarily makes you a feminist by default, well, I'm sure you can see where this is going.
Cutting in to explain how those issues don't make you a feminist is jumping the gun because that was her point. She wasn't a feminist. You see, Teal'c is responding to only a sentence fragment here, so he got the wrong end of the stick and thought that the examples Anita listed were exclusively examples of what she thinks are feminist causes. But they weren't, or at least they weren't necessarily.
And as I've already outlined, no, I'm pretty damn sure she actually considers these things to be feminist issues because of what I've said before. Listening out to the rest of the sentence doesn't actually change that at all. Again, we're pitting your subjective interpretation against my interpretation, and you're basically just saying, well, my interpretation is right because it's mine. It's not objective at all.
I mean, Anita might think that war, for instance, is a feminist issue, and there's plenty of arguments for that. One of the arguments for that is that it's mostly men who are expected to go and fight in wars, which Teal'c actually mentioned incorrectly, thinking that he was contradicting the idea that war is a feminist issue. But, you know, there are other arguments. The necessary relaxation of some traditional gender roles during wartime is certainly an interesting feminist issue, in my opinion. And I say in my opinion because it's just my opinion. Something to keep in mind going forward is that there is no one fixed meaning of feminism. Whether or not certain issues are feminist issues is arguable. You know, feminism at a fundamental level is an idea. There is no feminism element on the periodic table. There are no feminism atoms we can look at under a microscope to see if something is actually really feminist or not.
Yes, we know the tired old feminism is not a monolith argument. Rather interestingly, this is actually most of the problem when it comes to trying to talk to any sort of feminist. Because you bring up anything a feminist has done somewhere else and they just simply say, well, that's not my feminism, or that's not true feminism. There is absolutely nothing about feminism to hang your hat on. It's slippery. You're a tricky little bunch, which is actually part of the reason why I find it impossible to take anyone speaking for feminism, or just feminists in general, seriously for the most part. Because how do you expect to have any sort of grassroots movement that's going to afflict any sort of political change if you can't agree on anything?
Is this pedantic enough for you all, by the way? It's basically this for the rest of the video, I'm afraid, and I'm very sorry. You know, everything seems trivial after the election. I need to do a lazy one to get back into it. I'll get back to responding to something worthwhile soonish.
Ah, so that's why you had to go with all the really desperate cherry picking. It's 'cause you're intellectually lazy. Well, I wish I could say I was surprised.
Let's move on.
So, like most people who grew up immersed in the neoliberal ideology of the West,
What? Neoliberal ideology of the West. Let's just break that one down for a moment, shall we? Neo, meaning new. Liberal, the idea that the world should be governed on a principle of liberty and equality for all people. And this is supposed to somehow be a bad thing to think. Oh wait, what am I saying? Of course it's bad, because it's the patriarchy, right? But wait, hang on, what is modern feminism? Well, it's new, so we could certainly describe it as being a neo-ideology, and it keeps saying that it wants to push for equality for all people, so yeah, that word actually kind of encompasses modern feminism as well. I know you're trying to invent a load of bullshit nonsense buzzwords that people can then go home and throw out on their Twitter and Tumblr accounts to try and make themselves look intellectual while they're talking about some mythical patriarchy, but I really don't think you've even considered what these words actually mean.
Someone doesn't know what neoliberal means. Ah ha ha ha. And man, this one takes me back. So long-time Shaun and Jen watchers will remember my take on Leafy's video about Milo Stewart. And in the course of making that video, I had to read thousands of Leafy's comments. And one thing I saw over and over again was people who were confused by Milo's language. You know, Milo's just making up all of those big words to seem clever. And this shows how sheltered and kinda arrogant, to be honest, that I was at the time, because the first few of those comments that I read, I assumed were jokes. I was like, what big words? You know, not that Milo isn't well spoken or anything, but nothing he said was all that complicated. Or so I thought, anyway. I now realise that it's all relative, of course. A lot of concepts are just new to a lot of people. There's nothing wrong with that. It's entirely possible to have just not encountered the word neoliberalism before. There's no shame at all in being ignorant of that concept. What there is shame in is assuming that because you haven't heard of it before, it must therefore be a bullshit buzzword someone else is just making up to look smart, and then breaking it apart into its component pieces in an attempt to decipher its meaning, rather than just admitting ignorance and looking it up. Now, of course, YouTube commenters were quick to point out TLD's mistake, which led to him claiming it was just a joke, which led to the rather obvious follow-up question, what was the joke? And I guess after getting a bunch of comments explaining his mistake, TLD got sick of it and added the following disclaimer to the video description. To all the people telling me I don't know what neoliberalism is, you missed the joke, so here it is, spelled out for you. She's ignoring the actual definition of neoliberalism and contorting it into some nebulous term regarding oppression and privilege, and basically ignoring the economic aspect of it, so I simply redefine it as well, so it can quite easily include herself, which... well, that's not actually true, is it, TLD? Because you explicitly accused Anita of inventing the term. Sorry, the bullshit buzzword.
I know you're trying to invent a load of bullshit nonsense buzzwords that people can then go home and throw out on their Twitter and Tumblr accounts to try and make themselves look intellectual while they're talking about some mythical patriarchy.
You see, what actually happened here was Anita Sarkeesian knew something that you didn't know. In this one instance, Anita Sarkeesian was smarter than you. But of course, TLD can't possibly admit that because that would unravel his whole video, the foundation of which is that Anita Sarkeesian has to be an idiot. So he has to do the just a joke defense, you know, I was just kidding, it was just satire, I was doing the Socratic method. I don't know what I was doing, but whatever it wasn't not knowing something.
Now, I love when feminists do this. They always have to impugn motive on someone. So in this instance, my pointing out that what I was doing was making, admittedly, a very poorly formed joke on this instance. But nope, this guy knows my motive and knows what was going on in my head better than I do. So let me unravel this in the best way that I can. You accuse me of not knowing what neoliberalism means, and then you put up Wikipedia on the screen. Now, I'm guessing that you didn't actually bother reading that Wikipedia page. If you scroll on down there to the current usage section, according to Bose and Gansmoss, neoliberalism is commonly used as a catchphrase and pejorative term, outpacing similar terms such as monetaryism, neoconservatism, the Washington Consensus, and market reform in much scholarly writing. And then it goes on to further outline how. So basically, what I'm doing in that video is breaking down the pejorative, which in the context of Anita's speech is what I see it as being, and have simply done so to demonstrate that you could apply it to the concept of feminism as well, when using it in the pejorative sense. My point about saying that Anita is inventing bullshit buzzwords is pointing out that Anita is inventing buzzwords in the sense that it's another word that people are going to use to try to sound like they know what they're talking about when they don't have any particular understanding of what they're actually saying. The invention part is in reference to the fact that she is expanding the use of this word to include yet another pejorative. It's kind of funny that you criticize me for supposedly only focusing on parts of sentences, and then you focus purely on a couple of words. Also, I guess I should point out here, the foundation of my video isn't that Anita has to be an idiot. The foundation of my video is that Anita is wrong in her view of feminism. But then, while we're talking about faulty foundations for videos, the foundation of your video is that all I do is stop videos every 30 seconds to say naughty words. Something which, well, we've already demonstrated is complete and utter nonsense. As for this frankly nonsensical accusation of, "Here, you can never admit not knowing something," well, let's take a little look at some video evidence, shall we? So in my video, Birth Control Jab for Men, you know, that video where I stop someone else from talking every 30 seconds to say naughty words, in the part where I'm talking about the various centers which were used to test this drug, I bring up the anomaly of Indonesia, and how the Indonesian clinic was disproportionately represented in the adverse effects. And then I have this to say about it. And this is after listing off about half a dozen potential explanations for that anomaly.
Is there something about their native production of these hormones, or is there a certain gene that's more prevalent within Indonesia that reacts with it? Who knows? This is something which is going to have to be followed up on in other studies to begin to work out why Indonesia was such an anomaly in this particular regard.
Yeah, so I list off a whole bunch of possibilities and then say, I don't know which one this is. Yeah, but I can really never admit when I don't know something. What about this from the op-ed video I published about the cycle of oppression inflation, which was an opinion piece based on an earlier live stream which I did with Alison Tiemann from Honey Badger Radio, where we talked about the concept of resource provision from men to women and how that is a fairly typical pattern of human behavior, and how when you transfer that from material to the abstract, as in giving women ever more and more and more rights, even going into the frankly absurd where you start having to enforce rights against other people in order to get things like the right to feel safe, the right to be forgotten, and so on and so forth, and how this seems to be having a sort of snowball effect. Well, I had this to say at the end of that video.
Is there a way to short this out? I don't know. Will there actually be a bust at the end of this inflation? I'm really not sure. People seem to be catching on and realizing it's becoming ridiculous. But is that realization going to be enough to snap people out of their pattern of give to women thought? I don't know. Or is this just the finale of the cycle of empires? Who knows?
Within just under 30 seconds, that is 4 instances of me admitting that I don't know things. God damn, all of that pesky video evidence proving you wrong again.
TLDR mentions the actual definition of neoliberalism, so pray silence everyone for Professor Dictionary, the inventor of all the words, come to tell us what they actually mean. You see, if you do what TLDR should have done and Google neoliberalism, you can read all about it for free, and one of the first things that Wikipedia tells us about the term is this. The definition and usage of the term has changed over time, and it goes on to lay out all the differing and changing meanings of the word neoliberalism.
So you can understand that, but then you can't understand why I make mockery of the changing use so that you can use it as a pejorative. And then I do the same thing. That says something about you.
Speaking of definitions of words,
Back then, I thought sexism basically boiled down to a few bad apples with misguided personal beliefs born out of ignorance or overt hatred.
Right, stop there. That is exactly what sexism is. Just like racism. Just like homophobia. They are not the wider pervasive views of society. They are the views of a select few, vast minority of society.
So that's what sexism, racism and homophobia mean for anyone who was wondering. They're not societal or cultural problems. They're merely individual problems, and that's all. And that's quite nice, isn't it, to finally have that issue resolved. However, TLDR later quotes the dictionary definition of the word compassion at Anita in an attempt to catch her out on something, and he uses Google's dictionary feature for this. So let's see what Google's dictionary feature thinks of the word sexism. And here's their example of the word sexism. in a sentence. Sexism in language is an offensive reminder of the way the culture sees women. And while we're at it, let's just see what dictionary.com thinks of the word sexism. Ingrained and institutionalized prejudice against or hatred of women. So the dictionaries, at least, seem to think sexism is more than just an individual problem. Hey, the dictionary. Quote it when it agrees with you, and quietly ignore it when it doesn't.
Critical logic failure. And now I'm going to explain why. The term sexism is very contentious these days. People who value the concept of individualism will prefer to take it as meaning only something that individuals can do, that it is not something that is pervasive throughout society or in some way systemically ingrained. However, it is a very common feminist assertion that things like sexism and racism are prejudice plus power and absolutely are systemically ingrained in society, despite having absolutely no objective evidence to back that up. The term compassion, however, doesn't have any such contention around it.
With the help of some amazing mentors and by reading a lot of feminist writing, especially the words of women of color and queer women from around the world.
Because the opinions of white women and straight women are apparently lower on the hierarchy of importance than all of those people. Also, you know what? I'm starting to lighten up to this idea of calling folks people of colour and queers. Because now, when I want to go on a good old-fashioned nigger lynch or fag drag, I can use the correct terminology. Thanks, feminism, you fucking bigots.
So I don't really know what was going on with that last bit. I think it was just a joke that didn't quite hit the mark there, to put it lightly.
Oh no, he didn't find a joke funny. That surely means that it's going to be some sort of fallacy or something. Yeah, unfortunately for you, actually quite a lot of people got the joke and did find it funny.
But let's address the part before that, where Anita says she especially read the words of women of colour and queer women from around the world. And TLDR takes this to mean that Anita is discounting the words of straight white feminists. However, this is another example of TLDR cutting Anita off in the middle of a sentence. You see, the rest of Anita's sentence reads like this, and it's the intersecting social systems bit that I really want you to pay attention to here. It's not that Anita's saying the words of straight white feminists don't matter, it's that they're not enough by themselves. She's saying you need a bunch of different viewpoints from different people. So the words of women of colour and queer women would be especially important for someone trying to understand interacting social systems, because they will have particular insights about things like race and sexuality that you wouldn't necessarily get if you exclusively read the works of straight white people.
Unfortunately for you, you are completely wrong. Someone having a different orientation, race, gender, anything else like that from you does not necessarily mean that they have a different perspective from you by default. In fact, I have an entire video about this where I stop what someone else is saying every 30 seconds to say naughty words, where I read an academic study published in the Cambridge Journal of Behavioural and Brain Sciences, which demonstrates why diversity in political viewpoint is far more important than race, sexuality, orientation, or any of those other criteria, and also then demonstrates why the horrendous liberal biases, especially in the soft sciences, is actively harming the field of study.
Unfortunately, many contemporary discourses in and around feminism tend to emphasize a form of hyper-individualism, which is informed by that neoliberal worldview.
You are really offended by this idea that people can and do think for themselves, aren't you? Or is this just some sort of subtle manipulative way of you trying to say, yeah, it's okay for you to think for yourself, as long as what you think agrees with me? Because if you agree with me, that's the only way that you're not going to be a hyper-individual, neoliberal shitlord.
And this part represents the main misunderstanding of TLDRs here. TLDRs here. Anita is going to go on to denounce so-called choice feminism, and argue that feminists have a responsibility beyond the individual. Now, key to this idea is that individual actions do matter quite a lot. That's the whole point, in fact, that individual actions have ramifications beyond the individual. Anita's argument here relies upon the existence and importance of individuals. TLDR completely misses this and thinks Anita is arguing that individuals don't or shouldn't exist, and that feminism should be some sort of Borg collective.
No. I don't think that feminism should be some sort of Borg collective. What Anita goes on to say in this speech is that individuals should always start putting the needs of feminism basically ahead of themselves so as to not tarnish the image and reputation of feminism. That's why she denounces things like choice feminism. She's basically saying, if you're an individual and you behave individually but in a way that doesn't benefit feminism, then you are necessarily oppressing other people. A point which I fundamentally disagree with, because it is not true. Your individual actions, yes, they can have wider-reaching implications, but they don't always, and those don't always have to be negative, which is basically the crux of her argument. That if you are a choice feminist and you do something that benefits you, that's just you as a woman making patriarchy work for you and therefore disadvantaging other women. This entire point of view hinges on the reliance that the feminist patriarchy assertion is actually true, which it is not, since it is basically an entirely subjective thing. Ask 10 different feminists and you get 10 different definitions of what patriarchy is.
Okay, so this is the part where I say things that may ruffle some feathers.
So after demonizing the white man, dehumanizing women, people who aren't white and people who aren't straight, down to the point that they have no autonomy of their own, this is the point where things are going to get offensive. This is the line in the sand past which the offensive stuff begins, apparently.
Now then, what on earth is he talking about here? Just to pick one point out of that mess, dehumanizing people who aren't straight, down to the point where they have no autonomy of their own. Where in her speech did Anita do that? I think what he's talking about here is earlier when Anita said she was involved with clubs arguing for gay and lesbian rights, and to which TLDR responded,
So you really shouldn't presume to speak for all lesbian women everywhere, you heterosexual oppressive shitlord. After all, nothing quite says I'm fighting for equality like speaking over all of those marginalized voices.
You know, is that it? The only other time Anita might have mentioned gay people is when she said that she read the works of queer women. So it's gotta be the first one, right? Anita says, I support gay and lesbian rights. And TLDR responds, so you're dehumanizing gay people to the point where they have no autonomy. That's ridiculous. I thought it was meant to be the social justice crowd who were overly dramatic and easily outraged.
Seriously, bro, what are jokes and hyperbole? But this is the feminist selective humour chip that they all have installed in their brains. If you make a joke, you're being completely and utterly serious. If you're putting a little bit of dramatic flair onto something for the sake of being amusing, then clearly you're actually being really angry and outraged and totally serious. 'Cause that makes sense, right?
But I think it's a critical discussion to have. So
No, it really isn't. But you know what is a critical discussion to have? The blatant hive mind that is on display in front of us right now. Notice how every single woman is sitting in exactly the same way, bar the one notable exception who is anatomically unable to do so, because her legs are in fact beginning to fuse together in her chrysalis stage, at which point she will emerge as a full-fledged hut. Just an observation. Anyway, let's keep going.
So, completely unnecessary, unfair, and tangential attack on an unrelated person aside, I absolutely love the concept of a hive mind, but with exceptions. You know, if we look at the source video and the next wide shot of the whole panel, we see that the two people to Anita's left are sitting differently. Jermaine Greer has both of her feet on the ground, and the person on the end has her legs crossed in the other direction. How did it come to this? So, look at all these women sitting in the exact same way, except for the ones who aren't. 4 out of 7. What a hive mind that is.
See, we've got that selective humour thing going on again. Crack a joke. Oh, well, I better overanalyze the ever-loving shit out of this and then prove a joke is wrong. I guess when you lack actual legitimate points, you just have to kind of desperately claw out whatever you can.
women can choose from a pre-approved palette, but we cannot meaningfully choose liberation.
Okay, you know what? I am getting really sick of all of this feminism social justice bullshit. So I am making a patriarchal decision and announcement. As of immediate effect, feminism and social justice warrior are now removed from the patriarchal palette of pre-approved roles that women can fill in society. So I'll give that a couple of days for the message to get around, and then feminism and social justice will just go away, right? Oh, wait. No, it won't. Because this mythological patriarchy palette doesn't fucking exist!
TLD is doing the misunderstanding the patriarchy thing. Seen that one before. A bunch of these dudes hear patriarchy and see this, like a secret male Illuminati who decide everything, and then they project that misunderstanding back onto where they heard the word patriarchy, and they don't bother to go and check if it's right. I think this just comes down to having no faith at all in women's intelligence. You know, any idea they come up with automatically has to be the most stupid possible interpretation of that idea.
Unfortunately for you, no. That point of view has actually been established by a feminist, and you can actually find her here on YouTube. There's an excellent video that I suggest you go and watch by a YouTuber by the name of Morally Grey, and what he does is looks through all of the patriarchy videos put up by Dr. Christy Winters, and he then lists off what her criteria are for a patriarchy, and he plays all of her videos and the relevant parts. And the conclusion of what a patriarchy is, from a feminist, is Any population imbalance between males and females that favours males. Any subjective barriers that may or may not exist which prevents women from advancing. Both males and females can be powerless at the same time, so long as the powerful are male. Family units where the father controls all, and where the gender of the person is the only predictor of social power. Any subjective barrier labelled rape culture which prevents male issues. Rape jokes. Subjective concepts of societal standards where men are above women due to a higher religious power that may or may not be reflective of the wider society. The powerful, being male, have legislative or authoritative control over female issues. Now, if you look through that checklist, and this is what Christy Winters asserts a patriarchy is, anything that has a population imbalance between males and females, subjective barriers that may or may not exist which prevent women from advancing, and both males and females being powerless at the same time, so long as the powerful are male. Taking these points together, what she has actually described is a system known as oligarchy, a small group of disproportionate power which are ruling everyone else. And in order for that to be a patriarchy, the majority of them would have to be male, which actually means exactly what you put up on the screen. So no, it's not a misunderstanding of what it is, or having no faith in women and their intelligence and just assuming that whatever they say has to be the most ridiculous interpretation. It's a point of view actually informed by what some feminists have described. But let me guess, that's not proper feminism or something, right? Because, you know, feminism isn't a monolith, and herpty-derpty-derp. Feel free to go and take this up with all of your feminist colleagues.
It's understanding our own intersections of privilege and oppression and how that will fundamentally change our behaviors and attitudes and values. It's realizing that being a feminist is a lifelong learning endeavor, and that we will make some mistakes on the way, and we should be compassionate to ourselves when that happens.
Yeah, mistakes will be made, like demonizing half of the population, and then telling the remaining half of the population that they're too incompetent to be trusted forming their own destiny in life. But you should only be compassionate to yourself when you make those mistakes. And speaking of mistakes that you make, Anita, I really think that you should look up the definition of the word compassion, because it doesn't mean what you think it means.
And here we go. It's the reason I decided to respond to this video. So as I mentioned before, this dictionary is Google's dictionary, the same dictionary that previously disagreed with TLD's narrow interpretation of the word sexism.
We've already established why you're wrong here. The term compassion is not as contentious as words like sexism in the modern time.
So here, TLD is upset because Anita said that we...
Okay, I just want to slip something on in here, and it's about loaded language. This is something which I notice a lot of feminists do. They always like to describe people who bring up counterpoints to theirs as being upset or angry or something along those lines. They've always got to try and basically make it so you're just having an emotional reaction to this, therefore you're not being logical or rational, and the implication, of course, is, therefore, because of this, you must be wrong. While they're not going to explicitly state, because you're being emotional, you're wrong, it's just kind of putting that thought in the mind of the person watching before going ahead. And I find it really weird that feminists would use this approach, like, oh, you're being angry, you're being upset. Oh, I'm not saying that makes you wrong, but I'm just mentioning it because reasons. It's basically nothing more than a cheap on-your-period jab, something which feminists tend to get a little bit butthurt about.
So here, TLDia is upset because Anita said that we, talking about feminists, will make mistakes and should be compassionate to ourselves when that happens. Because he thinks the word compassion can only be used with regards to things other than the self. And that is the common understanding of the word. If you just say, you have compassion, the listener will generally assume that you mean for other people. If you want them to understand the idea of having compassion for oneself, you'd need some other words in that sentence, some surrounding context that modifies the meaning of the word compassion. And Anita does seem to have thought of this. Let's see how she starts off, trying to get the idea of having compassion for oneself across to her audience. Compassion, right. But we all know what this means. Sympathetic pity and concern for the sufferings or misfortunes of others. Uh-oh, Anita. Bad start there. You're going to have to do better than that. How are you going to dig yourself out of this hole? Hang on, what does to mean? A preposition used for expressing aim, purpose, or intention? Very sneaky, Anita. You see, she's given herself an out. If her next word, whatever it is, differs from the dictionary definition of what it is understood people usually have compassion for, she will have successfully modified the word. Anita Sarkeesian is a literary genius. I can't wait to see what she comes up with next. And holy shit, the roller coaster ride is over. And taking this all together, we understand the idea. We should be compassionate to ourselves.
Wow. Holy shit. You know, this is the crowning moment of this video. This is the reason why he wanted to make this video. This is it. This is the best moment of it. This is the money shot. And the best you can do is point out the fact that I find it odd that she's saying we need to be compassionate to ourselves when she's reading off a script, and you would have thought that when you're talking about having self-compassion, which is a thing, you'd have thought she'd maybe phrase it like, we should have compassion for others and a little bit of self-compassion. So I just find her phrasing to be a little bit weird, especially when you've got a chance to pre-script it. You know, if this was something which was said off the cuff, I'd probably think nothing of it. But pre-scripted to choose this kind of jarring grammatical structure, I just find that a bit odd. And this is the best point that you could have. This is the reason. This is the thing that made you want to do this.
Now, when I make these videos, I usually end up saying something like, if you watch the whole video, the point's clear. But I'm going to have to say to Teal Deer, if you listen to the end of the sentence, the point is clear. Not content with responding to sentence fragments anymore, Teal Deer is now responding just to individual words. Which looks quite fun, to be honest, so I'm going to take a crack at it.
So, how to be a feminist.
Aye, of course. That is how Saint Sarkeesian would start off a speech, isn't it?
And then this guy just devolves into really bad personal mockery for the last, 5 minutes of this nonsense. Not content with having blatantly lied to his audience, basically asserted that his subjective interpretation is the one true way, and proving to the world that jokes aren't serious, this is now how he ends things. As you can see, this is truly the intellectual powerhouse of YouTube feminism.
Straight white guys are the touchiest, most fragile people on this planet, I swear to God. Grow a spine! Outro. Don't know why I said outro. I apologise about this one. I needed a little post-election catharsis, you know. I'll do something more substantial next time.
Well, judging by the rate at which you skipped over more substantial content in order to cherry-pick this single video and then pick out about half a dozen points from it, I'm going to just say, liar.
If you'd like to get in touch, send me a... I'm still sick, by the way. Send me a message on Twitter or AskFM. If you're feeling very charitable, there's a donation link on the YouTube banner, but don't donate because of this video. Go and watch one of my better videos and...
Oh, sweet irony, given the first, 10 minutes of this video.
Right. See ya.
Okay, thanks, bye. Back off to those cherry trees you go to, only pick the little bits that you want.